right, today, lecture number 5, Bad Faith. That's what it's called. Self and society class, social phenomenology, if you will. I got a couple of little comments first about situational definitions again, which I've discovered now that I start thinking, you start thinking about these things, you start seeing them everywhere. So this past weekend, my wife and I went down to Connecticut to visit with my stepdaughter and her husband and our grandchildren. So the grandchildren are 2 and 5 as of tomorrow. So I don't know if you've ever spent any time with 5-year-olds, but they're real different. They're little kids generally are fascinating to me. But a couple of things happened that were kind of relevant for situational definitions. So the 5-year-old went to a party on Saturday that I went to with her. And it was like a birthday party for one of these other kids. And they did duck pin bowling. You know what duck pin bowling is? So it's bowling, but the ball is about this big. So it's a lot smaller, much easier to handle. So little kids can plausibly do this, even though they kind of do one of these, right? But here's what's interesting about it. So officially, this is a birthday party, and they go bowling. But what you realize pretty quickly is the official definition of the situation doesn't matter at all to these kids. The party part they got, but bowling, So they get out there and they get decked out in bowling shoes, and they're told, okay, you roll this, and somebody sort of directing them. And the guy was great. The guy who was in charge of this thing was really good at being low profile, and the kids had a great time. But it became immediately obvious that the bowling part wasn't what was fun. What was fun was the shoes, because they're slippery on the bottom. So the kids are slipping and sliding back and forth across this bowling alley. Periodically, they push a ball. But that wasn't the point. The point was sliding around on the shoes. And then we go in for lunch, which consisted of bowling alley pizza. Okay. And the shoes were great there, too, because the floor was still different. So they were sliding around on that. But then the mom in charge says, oh, there's a little game arcade. And she gave each kid a little cup with a bunch of tokens. Right? I'm like, yeah, this is great, free tokens. The kids didn't care about the games. What they cared about was that you take the tokens and you go like this. Next thing you know, they're singing, I kid you not, Jingle Bells. Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle all the way. And that was the fun deal. And then, you put some tokens in the games. All right, so the general phenomenon, though, is quite noticeable, which, the standard old version of this is the box is better than the present that comes in it to little kids. You give them an expensive present, and what they really like is, crawling in and out of the box or putting it on their head, or there's a tube, wrapping paper tubes are great. I see you, I see you. And I used to think somebody should start a toy store that's nothing but things kids actually play with, as opposed to the official toy. It's before they've learned, now that's a toy and that's not a toy. Because I was telling Professor Kelly about this at lunch, and he said, kids have no notion of a toy. The whole world is a toy to kids, to little kids, right? And so they're much more creative about these things, whereas we've kind of been taught, oh, no. This is the expensive thing that Grandma gave you. That's what you're supposed to say, oh, I like that. And that's what you're supposed to play with, not the box or the string or whatever that it came in. Okay? So I just thought it was interesting kind of how flexible the situational definitions are for young children. That was kind of fun. But that's not really our topic today. Okay. So today's topic is bad faith, which is a concept from Jean-Paul Sartre's book, Being and Nothingness, is what the book's called. And the word, the phrase bad faith, the French is mauvaise foi, sometimes gets translated as self-deception. And what we've been talking about up until now is Sartre's idea that we are responsible for our own actions. And that covers a lot of different things. We're responsible, for instance, in choosing, we might say, the situational definition. How to regard a situation that you come into. How are you going to treat it? We're responsible for how we respond to things in all sorts of different ways. And Sartre describes that at length. But that means that he sees human beings as having this kind of open-ended freedom, but it's freedom that's embedded in a real world, so that we have, what we do has results. And we're just as responsible for the results as for kind of the direction in which we decide to move. Well, that's kind of a drag sometimes. It's kind of unpleasant. It's more than unpleasant. It's deeply troubling to people. And Sartre was not the first person to realize this. But what he's talking about is existential anxiety, or existential Angst. A-N-G-S-T is the German word for it, and the way a lot of people refer to it. That is, it's hard to be responsible for everything you do. And there's a sense of guilt about all the stuff that you've left undone, or should have done differently, or you've totally messed up your life, or could have been something utterly different. And the realization of that is deeply troubling to people. And existentialists and various philosophers and thinkers have realized this for 1,000 years. It's not a new idea with Sartre. What is new, relatively, for Sartre is trying to codify the way that people escape from that anxiety. Okay? Or, to put it differently, how do you deal with being totally responsible for who you are and what you do? How do you handle that psychologically? And Sartre, in this section of this book, has set out this classic profile of a psychological phenomenon that describes how people handle overwhelming responsibility. Does that make sense? And the passage is about 10 pages long, but no exaggeration. It's quite a famous excerpt in 20th century literature, especially in philosophy or in French literature or something like that, right? It's fair to say, right? Yeah. The description of a waiter in a cafe in particular, which is one of the examples he gives, is a famous piece of 20th century literature. And you have that in handouts, and we're going to read it and talk about it on Thursday. Okay, so the basic idea is that the self, we've said, has two parts, isn't quite right, because they're not really parallel, but there are two facets of the self. One is freedom, or the future, or open-endedness. Sartre calls the for itself, the sense in which we can step outside of who we are and become something different, or reflection, or something like that. The for itself. And the other is what he calls the in itself, which is my thingness, right? The fact that I'm an object, that I have a past, that I've done stuff, that there's me as a determined object in the world. Those are two different sides to the self. Bad faith, simply, although the rest of the lecture will elaborate on the whole idea, bad faith is the attempt to escape freedom by becoming all one or all the other. By pretending either I'm nothing but freedom or I'm nothing but a thing. Either one of those, hiding, you might say, in either one of those is what Sartre calls bad faith. It's denying an important part of who you are in order to escape responsibility. Example. Let's say, as an example from Dostoevsky, let's say I'm a murderer. Let's say I kill somebody. and somebody says, that's horrible, you're a terrible person, you're a murderer, I can do one of two things to escape responsibility. One is I can say, you're right, I'm a murderer. I'm a deeply evil person. It's in my blood, it's in my soul. Fundamentally, I'm rotten. And that can be a way of escaping responsibility. I had no choice. That's just who I am. I'm that kind of person. Right? So it can be I'm a murderer, like the podium is just a thing. That's what it is. The other possibility is to say, I'm a murderer. I'm not a murderer. You understand? Like, I've done a lot of good things in my life. Many, many, many good things. I was good to my mother. I feed the dog every day, and I take her for a walk. I've done all these things. Okay, one day, things got out of hand. You know, and in a 30-second encounter with somebody, I just kind of blew a gasket and shot them. Why? What is that? That is an infinitesimal part of what's happened in my life. Really, I'm all these other things. And think of all the things I could go on to do. And great. All right? So that's a way, that's a form of bad faith as well. It's trying to deny this thing that actually did happen, that I actually did do. Right? So that's bad faith in the mode, we might say, of freedom. Like, I'm something else. I'm not limited to this one thing. So you can't call me a murderer. So either way, you kind of can't blame me. Either way, right? That's what bad faith tries to do. And the whole lecture today is devoted to a bunch of examples of this. So I think you'll get the picture much more fully as we go through. Now, what's important for this as a sociology course is that bad faith is this fabulous sort of psychological mechanism that links a free individual, right, or a self that can make choices and do all kind of wacky things, to the fact that societies are really quite structured and predictable. Okay, so you may remember we started the course asking, well, how is it possible that people can be free and yet sociology is possible? Sociology actually works. Right? You got all these people who could do anything, but they in fact are doing very predictable stuff. And bad faith, I'm going to argue, is this kind of, you know what a universal joint is? It's a piece of machinery that you have one thing that goes like this and another thing that goes like this. You see them underneath trucks. You see the thing spinning underneath the truck, a drive shaft, and part of the drive shaft has a universal joint that allows you have one bar that's spinning this way and another that's kind of spinning this way, and they're connected. It's a kind of joint that allows two things that are moving in sort of different spheres, different planes, to connect up. So I think of bad faith as being kind of something like that. It links these two elements of social life that seem quite disparate, and it allows them to work together. All right? It's a psychological mechanism. Now, let's go to page 2 of your handout. I'm going to describe a bunch of examples of what we might call modes of bad faith, or styles of bad faith, or types of bad faith. Might work pretty well. And I call those three the modes of time and roles, R-O-L-E-S, and values. And I'll explain what I mean by each of those. These are my terms. They're not in the literature anywhere. They're not perfect. It's kind of, something to at least organize the lecture. It's a way of thinking about these issues. You'll see how this unfolds. So, number 1 is bad faith in the mode of time. In other words, by this I mean bad faith where you kind of play with what time is, or where time exists, or something like that, in order to escape responsibility. Easy example. Some years back, I knew a man, and he was the father of one of my friends. And I went to their house, and at some point, Dad, decides, he says, let me show you my trophy room. And we go, the guy's in his 40s at this point. I was like 19 or something. We go, and he's got a room in the house where he has a mass of football memorabilia from high school. He was a big star in high school football. And, you know, articles from the newspaper and photographs and trophies all over the place and footballs that have been, you know, all this kind of stuff, right? This whole thing. And he spends a lot of time telling me all about it. I'm like, great. Kind of the high point, huh? Because you got the sense that this guy feels like the real me is this high school football player. And he was trying to live there. Okay? He was living, we would say, in the past. Now, lots of old people you meet have the same sort of feeling, right? And it's very common, for instance, I was reading something just the other day, very common for men who fought in World War II, to take an easy example. That was the high point of their life. I mean, it was the most intense, most important, most compelling thing they had ever been involved in, which is very understandable. But everything after that sort of looks like a, you know, sort of a second best or a reflection or shadow or just marking time, actually was the way this article put it. All right? So that's living in the past, we would call that. There are other forms of doing this, of bad faith in the mode of the past. One of my favorite examples, is the idea of being shy. So you find yourself, you go someplace, you go to a party, or you go to somebody's house, and you're supposed to kind of stand there and you look around, you're feeling sort of awkward, and you want to go meet somebody, but you're like, oh, I don't know. And you say to yourself, well, somebody says, why don't you go say hi? And, well, you know, I'm shy. And what you mean by saying I'm shy is I've always in the past stood over on the sidelines. And you're reifying that, we would say in sociological theory, right? You make it a thing. You make your shyness like a radioactive stone that's inside your chest. And it's just kind of giving off shy attitudes and shy behaviors. And you have nothing to do with it. You're not actively making a choice. I'm shy. That's just who I am. Little old me. Now, that, you realize, if you think about it, that can be kind of comforting. Right? People would like, as Sartre says, people would like that heroes and cowards be born that way. There's something nice about just being shy. Then you don't have to get up and walk across the room and say hi to somebody. You could just kind of, oh, it's just me. Right? There's a relaxation, you might say, involved in being a thing, being an object. The way a stone is the sort of thing Sartre always talks about. Okay, second example, second form of bad faith in a temporal mode, in other words, by playing with time, is bad faith by hiding in the present. By this, I'm just thinking, you can hide in the details of daily life so that you don't recognize anything else. You're like, well, I'm going to graduate from college this year, and then I got, or I could work on my thesis. Right? The seniors recognize this feeling. Better to bury yourself in working on your thesis than think about what might happen down the road. I'm totally sympathetic, okay? Okay. When you get older, time flies faster. Time goes faster, right? So I'm 5 to 10 years away from retirement. I don't want to retire. You understand? I really like my job. So I've discovered just in the last year or two, I don't mind grading papers the way that I used to. Huh? I really don't. I'm doing these papers for theory class all the time. I'm grading theory papers. I used to hate this stuff. Now, as long as I'm grading papers, I haven't retired. You know, that's part of what's going on, is I'm appreciating every little bit of the job as long as I can. But it's a way of not thinking about, what am I going to do at that point? Not so good, right? That's hiding, sort of hiding in the present. Another version of that would be, every so often you'll meet adults who present themselves as if they were never a child. You know, like that person's just 100% adult. There's no funny business going on here, Buster. And they kind of have no sympathy for the world of children. And it's not just they don't want to be around them, but, like, oh, I can't imagine, that's ridiculous. Like, I would never have done such a thing. It's kind of the implication, right? They've always been 45 years old. That's not true, right? It's not true at all. Or, they're also, there's hiding from your own future, there's hiding from your past in that sense. Okay. Third possibility, there's bad faith that hides, so to speak, in the future. All right? This is, tomorrow's a new day. Right? When I leave college, then I'll be in the real world. That's the easiest example. As if everything that happens for the first 22 years kind of doesn't count. Things will really start once. By golly, when I finish this thing, then I'll get on to the real work. Okay, it's always going to be in the future. My mom, bless her heart, used to always say, I start my diet tomorrow. I'm serious this time. Danny, I'm not just kidding you. She would say this to me. After 20 years, I realized she was serious. I mean, she was genuine about it. She says, I'm not doing this time. This is, because she ate a lot of chocolate, one thing led to another. And she said, well, the doctor told me I got to lose weight. Man, I'm doing it. Kiddo, I just cannot deal with this anymore. I can't tell you how many decades she spent telling me this. Right? At first it was funny, and then it got, you get the idea. It's like I'm turning over a new leaf. This is a new year. It's a new semester. Think about it. There's students who do this, right? Next semester, I got my act together. Okay, I've fussed around a lot, but no. But I've lined up my course. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to buy the books. I'm getting the file folders all set up. I get my desk clean. All right, things are going to happen now. Next semester. Okay, there's bad faith in the mode of looking for the future. Now, confession is an interesting version of this. So when you go and confess, I don't mean just to a priest, although that works, but anytime you're saying, I've been a terrible person, I'm so sorry, I've really messed up. What you're trying to do is get rid of all the stuff that's happened up till now. Yeah?
Can you specify for us which are the in itself and which are the for itself examples?
Well, that's a good question. Which are the in itself and which are the for itself? Well, okay, the past would be the in itself. Like if you lock yourself in what has already happened. Here's a list of, listen, you think I'm a worthless, let me show you stuff. I've written books, right? I've got to be taken seriously. I look like a chump right now. I've published. Okay, that's in the mode of the in itself. That is, I have this thing, kind of undeniable production or stuff I've produced or results or achievements. You find yourself in a bad mood and you go back and you flip through a scrapbook and look at pictures of yourself having a good time, and people, look, they're being nice to me. I've won awards. It's right here. That's more the in itself. The for itself is the future part. And the present, I don't know where we put that. Haven't thought about it. Good question, though. All right? So what I'm going to show you is a video clip. So you've got the words, but let me explain what's going on, because otherwise you wouldn't get it. So it's just a song it's a old song, 35 years ago, from the late 70s, from a group called the Doobie Brothers. And the song is called What a Fool Believes. If you're watching the video, you want to check it out on YouTube. And we're going to look at a live performance just because it'll capture some of the flavor of the era, let's say. And we'll turn down the lights when the time comes. Let me tell you what's going on in the song. It's it's a real catchy little tune. You might have heard it. I don't know. Anybody know this song? You might recognize it when you hear it. I don't know. But it's kind of bouncy, happy tune, conjoined with a seriously sad set of lyrics, which is part of what the song is about. It's about a guy, and he's having lunch or meeting in a cafe with a woman who he's in love with. and he hadn't seen her in a long time, like, years or whatever. And they get together. He thinks that they used to have a relationship, right? Sort of. And he keeps hoping they have a relationship, sort of. And it's obvious, the point is, it's obvious to anybody that this guy's just totally deceiving himself about what's happening. And she gets up to leave and smiles and offers apologies, and he's like, yeah, okay, well, I'll see you around, right? And she's like, yeah, I'll see you around. And he's thinking, well, she said she'll see me around. Right? Bad faith. Okay, let's roll this and turn off the lights. And
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so you get the idea there. Yeah, what seems to be is always better than nothing, right? So he fixates on particular moments or things, or, oh, she smiled, oh, she said we'll see you again, or whatever it is. And he takes that little chunk of the present and just expands it out into, well, years ago we went out on it, once, and this thing happened, and he picks up different chunks of things that have happened and tries to put them together into a whole scenario that obviously to anybody, that's not what's happening, yes.
But in situations like this, where you're dealing with two people who have obviously different perceptions of the
Yeah.
same relationship, like what makes her
What makes one of
perception
them?
inherently the right one? And like,
That's a good question, except they haven't seen each other for quite a few years.
yeah, I
they-
mean, so is it always have to be like the outside social perspective,
Oh, that's a
or
good question.
like maybe
Yeah.
why is his reality inherently
Hmm.
less valid?
Well, right, no, that's a fair question. That's a fair question. I don't know if I have an answer to that. Why? I mean, I think the answer would be, he knows. He knows. Really? And he just won't
Does he
accept
know
it.
if he doesn't know he knows though?
Well, this is a good question. This is part of the problem, actually, with the whole concept of bad faith, is can you be aware, okay, one translation of the phrase mauvaise foi that people use is self-deception. Is it psychologically possible to fool yourself, is what you're asking us, right? And there are plenty of philosophers who've argued, this is a stupid idea, it's not possible to lie to yourself. And I think Sartre's response would be, yeah, but people do it all the time. You know, in other words, his answer is the phenomenological one, which is, in your own experience, if you go first person on this, does this scenario sound like, yeah, that happens?
Well, you like reevaluate things based on new perceptions, but your like original perceptions, like they were within the context of what happened then.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to that, like maybe, like back in the past, she actually did think something about him, but like now years later, she's just convinced herself there wasn't anything there. Like,
Well, maybe that's what happened. Maybe that's what happened. That's definitely possible. I've been there. You know, where somebody then years later, you know, I say, well, once upon a time this and this, and she said, that never happened. Okay. So maybe, yeah.
I can say from experience that he probably just thinks it's a complete toss-up, so he's just hoping for the best and planning for the worst.
Hoping for the best? Maybe. Maybe that's what's going on. Okay. All right. We will get into these in much more detail. When you read the Sartre excerpt, there are 3 or 4 different examples, one of which is quite similar to this. And we'll get into it in detail on Thursday, okay? This is great. This is important stuff. Okay. So, second mode of bad faith might be in the mode of social roles, R-O-L-E-S. This is a term that's common in sociology, and you're all used to it, and so on, I'm sure. For instance, now in this case, there are 2 different ways this can work. One is you present who you are as nothing but the social role you're in. For instance, I'm just a professor. Would be an easy one. So a student comes to me and says, Professor, I got this problem, you know, there's this thing going on, I don't know, with my family or some friend or something. So I can't do this and this and this. I could go, hey, you know, that's your concern. I'm just a professor. I deal with like the sociology questions and you know, whether or not your paper's been turned in and stuff. But I can't get into that other stuff. That just won't work. Or a different form of that could be, which is kind of like bad faith in the mode of the present, is being a good student. Okay, so there are people who get into being a good student. Like, I'm going to really be serious. You know, they sit on the front row and they lean forward. You know, they're asking questions and they're doing the reading and they're concentrating real hard. And you get a sense sometimes that they're so focused on being a good student, they aren't actually hearing what's happening. Right? That you get so immersed in like this. But they're going to be a good student the way, you know, the table is a table. That's who I am, this is who I am. Everything I do kind of fits this pattern. See, it all works together. They're creating themselves as a kind of thing. Version of this. When I was in college, I knew a fellow who, really smart guy, really nice fellow, was one of my housemates at a certain point. He was studying physics. and he was studying astrophysics specifically. And we were talking about, what we were going to do with our lives at some point. He said, well, basically, I only have one option. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're going to be like a professor? He says, well, there aren't really many astrophysicists who do what I do. What I study is the birth of stars. I study hydrogen reactions on a big scale. Basically, he said, I'll probably wind up building bombs, because that's where the jobs are. You mean like bombs? We're not talking little bombs here. We're talking hydrogen bombs, right? Thermonuclear war, that kind of thing. He said, yep, that's probably where I'll wind up. And he was pretty chipper about it. I'm like, you okay with this? And he said, I'm a scientist. That's what I do. I'm not, he didn't care, he couldn't care less about politics, right? That's not what I'm into. As the old song, Tom Lehrer song about Werner von Braun. Once the rockets go up, who cares where they come down? That's not my department, says Werner von Braun. All right, was the guy who built bombs for the Nazis, and then, after the war, came over and built them for the U.S. Okay, and did a good job. Anyway, the end of that story was my friend I lost track of after graduate school. I lost track of him for 25 years. And then one day, there was a scandal. It was reported in the New York Times. And it was a pretty bad scandal, but a number of people lost their job. One of them was my friend. And his job, I discovered, there's his name, you ever heard of Los Alamos? Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico? It's where they build bombs. His official title was Associate Director for Thermonuclear Applications of Los Alamos National Labs. Now, let me tell you, the number of thermonuclear applications you can think of, like super big microwave ovens, there's one application. And he was in charge of it for the United States government. He was the head of the atomic bomb program for the U.S. government. All right? But again, I was thinking back, whoa, that's interesting. Well, I'm a scientist. That's what I do. I study thermonuclear, hydrogen reactions and so on. Okay. Another version of it, so bad faith in the mode of roles is quite familiar to us, right? It's a mainstay of sociology. Putting yourself in a role and saying, that's all that I'm doing. Now, that can have tremendously good effects, by the way, as you know if you've ever, say, been to the doctor, especially like, a gynecologist. You don't actually want your gynecologist to be a lot of other things. That person's a doctor. That's it. That's all, especially if it's a man. That's all we're talking about here. You see? And so that person has to, so to speak, project themselves as being nothing but a doctor in that situation. Now there's some great, if you're interested in this, there's several classic sociology articles written on this. One of them I should have assigned in class, of people doing studies of gynecology offices and how they're set up to convince you that the only thing going on here is medicine. Right? Okay. So it's a good thing. It can be a very good thing. All right, on the other side, there's bad faith where you're not hiding in the role as that's all I am, but you're kind of detaching yourself from the role. Okay, for the last 30 years, 9 to 5, I go to the office. You might think I'm, an accountant for General Motors, and that's all I've done for. Really, however, I'm an avid outdoorsman. But who I really am is hunting and fishing and so on. Somebody says, well, you haven't actually been out hunting and fishing in 17 years. Yes, but truly, that's who I am. I may look like a mild-mannered accountant, but really I'm a rugged, tough outdoor guy who enjoys the nature and so on, even though I've actually not done it in quite a while. Right? So the role, the way I actually spend my days, is not really who I am. It's something else. The classic case of this comes from World War II there was this guy, Adolf Eichmann. You know who Adolf Eichmann was? Anybody know? No. Okay. You need to know the name in your history books. It's famous, famous example. Okay. Adolf Eichmann was a Nazi. All right. He was in the SS, which was kind of the elite branch of Hitler's whole apparatus. And Eichmann was was high up in the SS, in an office where he essentially spent most of his time doing things like running railroad schedules. All right? He set up railroad schedules for deportations of Jews from all over Europe. He was the guy who figured out how to ship, millions of people from Hungary and Poland and so on and so on, all to Eastern Europe where they were massacred. And he knew that that was part of the deal, right? He was involved in what was called the Wannsee Conference, where 12 or 15 of these guys sat around and figured out how to do it, how to create the Holocaust, we would now say, right? How to manage it bureaucratically, because it was a tremendously complicated organizational activity. And Eichmann was one of the chief managers. Now, he escapes after the war, he flees, he goes to Buenos Aires, he goes to Argentina and hides out. 1960, I think 60, 61, Israeli agents discovered him living there. They kidnapped him, because the Argentine government wouldn't appreciate this. They kidnapped him, stashed him on an airplane, shipped him back to Israel, put him on trial. So, trial of the century, kind of thing. In 1961. It was one of my earliest childhood memories, actually, was seeing all this newspaper stuff about Eichmann. I'm like, Eichmann? Who's Eichmann? Eichmann was put on trial because he engineered the Holocaust, more or less. I mean, he was a major player. His defense was, quote, I was just doing my job. Right? He said, I never killed a Jew in my life. I have friends who are Jews. He said this, right? He said, I have nothing, there are some problems. They shouldn't have been this and that and the other. But I didn't decide to do it. I didn't kill anybody. I had nothing. I found the whole thing kind of distasteful. But I'm not making this up. This is what he said. You should read Eichmann in Jerusalem by Hannah Arendt. It's a really good book that describes all this. It was her coverage for the New Yorker at the time. And he said, I was just doing my job. I'm a bureaucrat. She writes this book that was quite controversial, but she said, you study the man. He was just a bureaucrat. He wasn't making that up, right? He was not a monster in our usual sense of the word, right? You meet the guy, he's an ordinary schlub, right? That's it. But he did do what he did, right? You don't want to forget that part. So Eichmann was trying to say, here's this role that I played, and I did it for 3 or 4 years, or whatever, and I was real conscientious because I tried to do a good job. But that's not really me. That was his defense. Okay. That's bad faith in a certain way, right? Trying to get outside of stuff you've actually done by saying it was just a role I was playing at the time. All right. Third form can be bad faith. This one's harder to explain. But it's bad faith in which you, I call it bad faith in the mode of value. What I mean by that is you're confusing what a value is when you do this. It's committing to the value that something has as if that value is an object or is just intrinsic in the thing. The example I gave early in the class is money. So when I tore a $20 bill in front of the class, people go, oh, as if that money, the value of it, is just intrinsic to it and is kind of necessary. So bad faith in these examples occurs when people think that something just totally has value in itself, and you have to honor that, rather than see that we give things their value. Another form would be what I call the comic form, which is where nothing really has value or is taken seriously. Now, Sartre has a nice description of this on page 92 of Existentialism and Human Emotions, which is the book you read the first half of, beginning. So if you want to scribble it down, page 92 is a nice section on this kind of thing. And he said, he's basically saying we need to, quote, repudiate this, what he calls the spirit of seriousness. Okay? So the spirit of seriousness, this is the left-hand column on your outline here, would be people who live in a spirit of what he calls seriousness. The spirit of seriousness has two characteristics, he says. It considers values as transcendent givens independent of human subjectivity. That is, values just are. They're out there, they exist. Right and wrong, for instance, they just are. Transcendent. Okay? And it transfers the quality of desirable from, in other words, that you should want something, from the ontological structure of things to their simple material constitution. In other words, something like a $20 bill, if you're serious, that's intrinsically valuable. My reaction has nothing to do with it. That's the serious attitude, what Sartre calls the serious attitude. Example might be you want to modify some policy at Hamilton or some policy in the class, and I say, I'm sorry, that's just the way things are. That's the way we do it here at Hamilton. What does that mean? That's the way it's always been done. Sorry, can't do anything about it. It's just the way Hamilton is. Or that's the way things work. You got to do what you got to do. It is what it is. Come again? It is what it is. No, it's not. The fact is, you could regard it differently. You have the power to regard it differently. Sartre points that out, right? So when you say, it is what it is, can't do anything about it, whatever, you're in bad faith. You're acting as if you don't have the responsibility for keeping it that way. I just have a line here at the bottom. There's an old joke. You know who Jack Benny was? He was a comedian back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And Jack Benny was famously tight-fisted. What's the word? What do you call it? About money, right?
Frugal.
Frugal. Well, very frugal, like exceptionally frugal. And it was it was part of his shtick. It was a joke. He wasn't in real life, but. So one of his lines was, they had him on a TV show at some point. A guy comes up to him with a gun and says, "Your money or your life?" And Benny stands there a minute, and then he goes, this was his gesture, he always did this. He goes, I'm thinking. Right? The idea being that for him, that's a serious consideration because he valued money so much, etc. Anyway, it's kind of a silly joke, but Jack Benny was good, if you're interested. So that there's bad faith in the mode of seriousness, where everything really has the value that it has as a kind of fixed quality that has to be honored. The other possibility, which is intellectually a lot more interesting actually, is what I think of as bad faith in the mode of the comic, where nothing has real value. This would be the person who they make a snide remark to you, and you go, or an offensive comment, and you go, hey, and they're like, I'm just kidding, I'm joking, right? Can't you take a joke? What's the matter? But they tend to use that a lot, like everything is a joke, and you can't quite nail them down, you never quite know where they are. Oh, excuse me, sorry, didn't mean to upset you. You're like, well, wait a minute, that's not funny. You need to. You go, no, I was just kidding around. Oh yeah, all right. Some years ago, we had a speaker on campus who came and gave this lecture, and it was, I don't know if you're familiar with kind of postmodern literary theory. Yes, some, a little bit. Mm-hmm. Very interpretive, very reflexive, like the person doing the interpretation always says, well, it could be another way, and so on. You have to take your own point of view into consideration. Anyway, this woman gave this lecture, and it was really interesting. But she made a bunch of claims, And at the end, people asked questions. They said, well, you said this and this and this. But then, and then she said, wait, just because I said that, why does that give that authority? Okay? And then somebody asked another question. She goes, no. But see, when you're asking that, what you're really saying is, okay? And there was after a while, people gave up asking questions. Because every time in an image that Sartre uses elsewhere, you'd grab her by the lapels and try to say, why did you say this? You'd find yourself holding an empty coat. She was always slipping out and claiming, no, that was what I said then, but that was just a way of getting you to think about such and such. Okay, I'm thinking, right? I'm thinking. But they were never where they claimed, she was never where she claimed to be, right? She was always stepping out and saying, no, I didn't really mean that, or there's something else, or you're just reading that upside down, or something of the sort. That's kind of bad faith in the mode of the comic, where nothing is taken seriously. And again, you might know people for whom everything is kind of a joke because they don't want to be committed. That's pure bad faith. They're afraid of actually being taken at their word. Okay, so those are three different kinds, different ways of doing bad faith with a bunch of examples. So let me see if I can summarize make a few general conclusion points then. All right, in general then, Sartre is saying, look, the self has these two different aspects to it. I hate to use the word, but it actually works in this case, aspect. That is, there's the self as a thing or object or given or reality or something. And then there's the self, the self as a thing. And then there's the self as freedom or possibilities or new decisions and so on. And the truth is, we're both. We're both. We have a kind of dual nature. That's it. That's the right answer. There's no solution to this problem. So for instance, I'm a teacher, right? But I'm also not a teacher. So the fact that I'm a teacher is important. I mean, no doubt about it. The fact that I'm not a teacher is also really important. So the way Sartre describes this situation, this kind of situation, is, he uses this in your reading a number of times. He says, I am not what I am, and I am what I am not. Okay? So, I am not what I am, and I am what I am not. So, an important part of who you are is all the stuff that you aren't. Footnote, but could be. Right? Some of which you actually will be. In other words, your possibilities that are either not yet realized or have been foregone, those are important parts of who you are. So you are literally what you are not. And at the same time, you are not, which is a very different point, you are not who you are. Right? You are not, you're not a student the way this is a podium. The truth is, you're a student, yeah. You happen to be a student right now. That could disappear. It could become irrelevant. It could change. Right? You don't exist. So in a way, what he's doing is playing with the verb to be. Not playing. Playing's the wrong word. He's pointing out the intrinsic ambiguity of the idea of existence. What does it mean to be something? And he's taken the position, of course, that it's existential. That is, you are, who you are, but then there are these other caveats to that. Not essential. You cannot ever be something once and for all. And that's hard to deal with. You can't ever be something once and for all. The way that a rock is a rock forever. That's it. It's a stone. No way around it. You, on the other hand, you're kind of ill-defined. And that's the nature of human existence. All right? So, in bad faith, basically one side or the other of this is denied, and the other side is all. That tends to be what happens. There's this other concept here I've got on the sheet, metastability, which I think we'll get into next time, but let me mention it quickly. What he means by metastable when it comes up in the reading is that just as somebody is sort of solidified in one side of this equation, once you try to nail them down, they'll slip to the other side. It's bad faith is a matter of always escaping in the other direction. And it's this continual back and forth. And that gets us to your question, right, which is how do people do that, right? How can you lie to yourself? Because the truth is, you know the truth, right? You know the truth. But what Sartre would say, and I would say with him, is, yeah, but it does seem to happen a lot. It might be philosophically or logically impossible to lie to yourself. By golly, people do seem to do it. Okay. Have a nice read. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much.